we have reached the end of the 2023 Formula One season, so that means it's time for me to reflect on my predictions from the start of the year. I remember most of my constructor standing positions, and I'm pretty confident that I did pretty well on this. But I'm very curious to see what my predictions were for the drivers' standings because I cannot remember that at all, and I think I did a terrible job with those ones. So we'll see how this goes. I have not seen this video since I made it way back in February before testing, so we'll see how things stand. Okay, I'm doing the drivers first. First off, in 20th, I have Logan Sargent. All right. I'm one position off here, but it's because Sargent actually finished 21st, which is something that I think is tough to account for. So I don't blame myself too much for that. I think this is about as good as I could have done here. In P19, I have Alex Albon.
Oh, dear.
Similar to Logan Sargent, he's just in a Williams, and that's kind of where they're at right now. I don't see much changing with them. Albon actually finished 13th, which is 6 spots off of where I had predicted. Oh boy. I think I severely underestimated Albon, but I think I severely underestimated Williams. However, in my defense, I don't think anyone saw their resurgence coming this year. I think what Williams did a really good job of is, I think for the majority of races, they still had the slowest car. But there were a few races where they were not. And they made sure to capitalize on those races. Like, if you look at Williams' season, they would have 0 points on the vast majority of races, but then the odd tracks that they were good, they would get like a P7, P8 finish, which would give them big point jumps, whereas some of the other teams were only going for the odd P9, P10. They were finishing in the points a little bit more consistently, but they were only getting 1 or 2 points every time, and so that wasn't enough to really go far up the order. So that was a really, really well done by Albon, and I'm so impressed by his season this year, and I think he was probably my worst prediction. In 18th, I have Yuki Tsunoda. Okay. Unfortunately, I think this is going to mean the end of Yuki's F1 career. Another bad take for Tsunoda. I think I was right in saying that I was worried that they wouldn't give him a good enough car, and they definitely didn't at the start of this year, but I was wrong that they wouldn't develop it because they did a great job at developing, and I think I would say it's the 6th fastest car now, maybe even 5th, pretty on par with Aston Martin at some tracks. Actually finished 14th, which is 4 off of where I had him. And so in 17th, I have Nick de Vries. Okay. I think he will outperform Yuki. No! He just has a little bit more consistency. No! And I would hope that he'd be less prone to making mistakes. That was been Yuki's Achilles heel the past few years. And so, I don't know. I personally don't really rate him as a driver. That was the correct take. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but he did not. Oh, Robin. P17. Nick de Vries finished 22nd in a 20 driver championship. We were all hyping him up so much at the start of the year, but he really struggled. And honestly, I do feel a little bit bad for him now, kind of looking back and thinking about how terrible that AlphaTauri was at the start of the year. The fact that he had to adjust to driving an F1 car. The fact that Yuki has come out since then and said that he did a very good job at giving them recommendations on the direction to develop the car. And so I do think that he got a bit of a bad rap at the start, although if you also look at what Sargent and Piastri were doing, I think he was doing a worse job than them at that time of the year. But still, brutal. Oh my god, I'm doing so bad with all of these lower down predictions. I think it should get better towards the top, but I don't know. And in 16th, I have Nico Hülkenberg. Okay. I think we would all love a miraculous Nico Hülkenberg podium, but I do not think it's in the cards for him, so it was very close. So Nico, I actually got bang on. I had him P16 in my standings. Oh man, he could have finished so much higher if he had if the red flag had been called maybe 10 to 20 seconds after it had, he would have finished on the podium, because then everything that happened on that third red flag restart would have counted and he would have been on the podium because of Carlos's penalty. And oh my god, could you have imagined the scenes if that had happened? I am so sad that it did not, but that actually was the only race that Hülkenberg scored points at, and it was enough to get him into P16 because he finished P7 in that race. I think 6 points for Nico in that race, and then he also got 3 in a sprint. So good one on me there. Haas just absolutely brutal this year. And in 15th, I have Kevin Magnussen. Okay. Kevin just makes so many silly mistakes sometimes on those first laps that have been causing him to go to the back. He managed to quell that though this year, but I do think he has more pace than Nico, partially because he did get a pole last year. Gimmick. He finished 19th. What I learned this year is that Nico is a better qualifier. Kevin is a better racer. I think Nico would consistently fall back during the races, and Magnussen would, or at least when the car wasn't terrible, would make progress up the grid a little bit. And so for that reason, Magnussen was able to snag a few lower points positions. So he finished in the points more often than Hülkenberg did, but he wasn't able to qualify high enough up to make a bigger points haul. So yeah, and I think Hülkenberg has kind of shown that he's the stronger driver between the two, which is a little bit surprising considering Hülkenberg, I think, is a good 6 years older than Magnussen. In 14th, I have Zhou Guanyu.
Joe.
I do think that he has closing the gap to Valtteri, and so I do not think that the points difference will be as big this year. He's proven to be very consistent, but I worry that he might not have the pace. So I have Joe way too high again. So maybe I didn't do as good of a job on the constructor standings as I thought. I think it gets better, but I just had all of these teams way too swapped. I had Williams too low, I had Haas too high, and yeah, I just had them way too swapped at the bottom here. Joe, I do think that 2024 is going to be his last season. I think at this point we've kind of seen his potential, and he is very good at being consistent and driving within track limits and not causing any incidents, but he just doesn't have that raw pace that I think you need to be successful in F1. So I think Alfa Romeo just really wants him to race in China, and once that happens, I think that'll be the end of his career, because I see someone like Théo Pourchaire coming in to take his spot at the end of the year. I had Joe too high. He finished 18th. In 13th, I have Valtteri Bottas.
Okay, this is better.
I do think that Valtteri won't have as big of a points advantage over Joe, but I do trust that he should be able to have some good qualifying
Yes, he
sessions
definitely did.
at some points in the year and be able to capitalize with some points off of that. However, I don't see the Alfa Romeo being strong enough for him to be higher than this. And again, I do think that they will probably tail off throughout the year. That was true as well. I have Valtteri in 13th, and he finished 15th this year with only 4 points above Joe. So the points gap definitely was closer, but I think there was definitely a pace difference between the two. And Bottas had a few really decent qualifying sessions, but just was never able to capitalize on it. The Alfa Romeo performed better on very, very hot tracks. They did well at Bahrain and they did well at Qatar. In 12th, I have Lance Stroll. He will have maybe 1 or 2 races a year where he just does something incredible and you're like, where did that come from and why haven't you put that effort in every race weekend?
That is Lance Stroll to a T.
So I think he will manage to get up to P12 based solely on a few of those bigger results.
Pretty much.
So I was 2 places off Stroll. He finished in P10. It seems like Lance Stroll performed about the same way that Aston Martin did. At the start of the year, he was relatively strong. He got points in 3 of the first 4 races and points in 3 of the last 4 races. In the middle, he dipped a little bit, but he still had some decent results. So I feel like people have given Stroll a bit of a bad rap this year. I think he's suffering from people comparing him to Alonso, who is able to get a lot out of whatever car he's in. I think Stroll is a lot more dependent on how good the car is. He only finished P4 once in Australia and P5 twice. Stroll suffers from the fact that he is not a very good qualifier, but he always seems to do better in the race and usually is able to make up positions in the race. And so I think if he is able to figure out his qualifying, I think he would be a much stronger driver. And I think he just gets a bad rap because of who his teammate is and also because of how he's in F1. I think Stroll finished about where we all expected him to finish, and I think we're just placing too high expectations on him. In P11, I have Pierre Gasly. It will take him a little bit of time to get adjusted. I do foresee him finishing behind Esteban. So I have Gasly in P11, which is exactly where he finished. However, he finished ahead of Ocon. Ocon once again has lost to his teammate, and he has only beaten his teammate once in all of his years in F1, and it was last year against Alonso when Alonso had about 8 DNFs in this season. Somehow he just keeps getting away with it every year, and we're getting to the point where people need to start questioning that. But yeah, Gasly, I think he definitely struggled in the first half of the year. I think it took him a bit to adjust to the Alpine. I think he also got into a bit of trouble with impeding penalties. I think he got one in Canada and like 2 in Spain because Alpine were being ridiculous. And yeah, he finished exactly where I had him. So let's keep going to hear what I had to say about Ocon, who I have in P10. Esteban has been settled in that Alpine team for I think 3 seasons now. And so he knows how the team operates and should be able to get the best out of that car that he was in last year and did a great job in. So I was actually pretty spot on. I do feel that Ocon is a more consistent driver, whereas Gasly has a lot more peaks and valleys. I think Ocon also fell victim to a lot of DNFs this year. I think he had more than any other driver on the grid. So I think he suffered from that a little bit, and that also is maybe his saving grace when it comes to Gasly beating him. Esteban actually finished 12th. In P9, I have Oscar Piastri. Oh, I do think it's going to take Oscar a lot of time to get accustomed to F1 as a rookie. So I think starting off the bat, I think he will be a bit off of Lando's pace, but I think as the year goes on, he will get closer and closer. I don't know if we'll get any like super impressive performances out of Oscar or not. False. I guess we'll see how this year goes. He might impress me. He definitely did. Okay, Piastri. I had him spot on as well. He finished P9 in the championship, and I think Oscar definitely impressed and definitely exceeded my expectations for him. I don't think anyone could have seen him winning a sprint race or getting a podium in his first season. So that's very impressive. I think I am now over the fact of comparing him to Daniel. I think I was definitely doing that at the start of the year when Daniel was out of F1 and McLaren were doing terribly, and I was all it's the car, not Daniel. But I think once they were able to figure out the car, and once Daniel also got his seat back in F1, I think I cared less about that. So good on Piastri. I am definitely rooting for him now. I love the Aussie boys, and I'm hoping that he can do even better things next year. Now in P8, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I have Fernando Alonso. I do think that the Aston Martin is going to be significantly faster this year than it was last year, with the Aston Martin also being much more reliable than the Alpine proved to be last year. I think he will be able to make the most of that and get a lot of points. I can't believe this, but I said that having him P8 would be a hot take, and Fernando finished in P4. Who would have seen that coming? That is unbelievable. I think part of that is down to the fact that Max just blew away at the front, and so all of these other drivers are just so much more tightly packed. But yeah, Alonso, I can't believe that he finished P4. That is insane. Oh my god. Wow. I can't believe I was that far off on him. But I did see a resurgence from Aston Martin coming last year because they had made significant improvements tail end of 2022, but I just did not see the jump that they had coming, and the fact that Alonso got as many podiums as he did this year is crazy. In P7, I have Lando Norris, the best of the rest. I do foresee Lando getting a podium this year, probably more than one, but Lando is just so consistent, rarely makes a mistake. I would be shocked if he finished lower than 7th, and shocked in a good way if he finishes higher than 7th, which I do not think is a possibility, but you never know. Okay. Lando actually finished P6, so I was just about right with him, only 5 points ahead of P7. I was very, very worried at the start of this year with that McLaren because I was like, oh my god, this is going to absolutely sewer my predictions, but McLaren really turned it around, and so the fact that Lando managed to finish where he did is very impressive, and only a point behind 2 other drivers as well, so yep, I was 1 spot off wrong with Norris. In P6, I have Carlos Sainz. Okay, I had them swapped then. I do think that he will start the year off a bit stronger than he did last year. Yeah, he did. Yeah, Carlos ran into a bit of bad luck this year. Like, I think he definitely could have finished 4th. He made a few little mistakes throughout the year, but he also just got screwed over by the FIA so many times. Like, that penalty in Australia dropped him from P4 down to P12, I think, or was it even P3 down to P12? And yeah, the Las Vegas drain pipe thing, the bump that he hit in Abu Dhabi, it just, yeah, a few bad luck moments. He did have a race win though, the only driver other than Max and Checo to have a race win, so that definitely also bumped him up. Yep, he was about where I thought he would be as well. In 5th, I have Sergio Perez. Okay, I'm very off on this one too. Is going to get left behind in terms of the development of the car. I think he will perform like last year very strongly at street races, which seem to be most of the first races of the year. So I think Sergio will start the year off strong, but I think as the year goes on and you get into more of the purpose-built tracks, I think he's going to struggle, and I think he's going to fall back. And I do think that the top 3 teams are going to be closer together this year, so that will mean that he will fall further back than he did in 2022. Oh, Sergio. I think we all just underestimated how much more dominant Red Bull would be than everyone else this year. And I think if you were looking at the stretch where Sergio struggled, this would be about where he would finish. But it's the fact that he definitely started the year off very strong and was able to pick up a lot more points because of that. And that's what got him into P2. It was a rough year for Perez, but not as rough as I had predicted somehow. In P4, I have Charles Leclerc. Oh, it's 1 off for Charles as well, although he tied for P4. So I think he will be able to qualify extremely well. But I do not trust the Ferrari to support him with strategy. And also their development consistently dips off year after year, going further into the year. You know, this year they actually went the opposite way, I feel like. They started off the year weaker than they ended. In P3, I have George Russell. Oh my god. Oh no. I think Mercedes are going to start off the year stronger, and I think they are going to be able to carry that throughout the year. I'm hoping for a battle with the Red Bulls for the championship this year. But with that, I do think that Hamilton will outperform George Russell. And for that reason, I have Lewis in 2nd. So George actually finished P8 and Lewis actually finished P3. So I was 1 spot off for Lewis, 5 spots off for Russell. Another brutal prediction, but George really struggled this year. I'm surprised at how much he struggled. He seemed to do okay in qualifying, which is proven by the fact that he tied Lewis on qualifying, but in the race he just didn't have any really standout performances this year. He had a couple podiums, but other than that, was very anonymous this year would be how I would describe George. And yeah, just Lewis completely obliterated him this year in terms of the races themselves. So Lewis finished P3. Yeah, again, I think I just I underestimated how good Red Bull would be this year. I would be surprised if he ever finished outside the top 3. I'm a little bit worried about next year because I think Mercedes are going to struggle a little bit out of the gate when they come up with a new car concept, but we'll see what happens. And then in first, I do have Max Verstappen.
Yep.
It's inevitable.
Yep. And Red Bull did not fall off at all. They went the opposite direction and completely obliterated literally everyone else.
Although I think part of that is also just the fact that Mercedes and Ferrari dropped the ball a little bit. And so that's part of the reason why that car was so dominant. But yeah, just an unbelievable season by Max, and I'm glad that I predicted it correctly. I just wish that it hadn't been so dominant. So one thing that I did last year when I did my prediction review video is I went through and added up how many positions off I was for each driver, and that gave me a total, and that way I can compare my predictions year to year. So last year for the drivers, I had a score of 44, and this year I have a score of 46. So I did pretty well, exactly the same as I did in 2022 on the driver's side. Somehow I feel way worse about this year than I do last year. 2022 I was a lot closer on a lot of the drivers, but I had 1 or 2 where I was just so far off that it really blew up my score. Whereas this year, I think I was pretty consistently off on a lot of them, but no one I was like extremely far off, apart from maybe Albon. Okay, let's keep going with the constructors. So in P10, I have Williams. It's gonna take James Vowles a long time to get settled into the Williams team. Oh man, Williams, I think, were my surprise team of the year. I think there were a lot of people's, well, I wouldn't say that. I think Aston Martin would have been at the start of the year, and then McLaren as the year went on. But I think Williams has got to be up there as well, just because I think James Vowles is a brilliant, brilliant man. I am so obsessed with him, honestly. Like, he came in and just implemented how Mercedes does things, and it just paid dividends immediately. And the fact that they jumped from, I think, P10 last year to P7 is just incredible. I'm so proud of them and so happy for them, and very happy that I was wrong here. In P9, I have AlphaTauri. I do think that they will be able to make a better car this year than they did last year. However, I do not have as much trust in the drivers that they have to be able to get the most out of that car. AlphaTauri finished 8th, so I was only 1 spot off for them. They would have finished in 9th, maybe even lower, because they were the last team for a very long time this year. But I think the fact that they decided to go back to developing the car like they develop Red Bull, and the fact that they brought in Daniel Ricciardo were definitely factors in bringing them up higher than I had them at the start of the year. I think if they had kept Nick in the team, I think they would have finished in 9th. So I'm happy with that prediction. I don't think you could have predicted Nick getting replaced halfway through the year. In P8, I have Haas. The incompetence at Ferrari kind of trickles down to Haas. And I don't fully trust Gunter Steiner as team principal either. I know everyone loves him, but I don't think he is the best at managing. Haas. We've got to stop having so much faith in Haas. I just think we're getting to the point now where I just don't think that Gene Haas is willing to invest enough money in this team to get it anywhere other than the back of the grid. I love what Gunter brings, but I think Haas needs a little bit of a shakeup if they want to improve. And I love Gunter to bits, but that team's just gone nowhere. They've gone nowhere since they started in F1 in 2016. And yeah, I think a change might need to happen for them to be able to improve, because they finished P10, 2 spots off where I had them. My P7 team, Alfa Romeo, I think are going to be kind of in a no man's land between kind of the more midfield teams and the back markers.
Nope.
Yeah, I feel, did Alfa Romeo even develop their car at all this year? I don't recall us ever hearing about any upgrades that they brought. So maybe that was part of their problem. I don't know. But they did well in Bahrain, and that was basically it. They didn't have the same start to the year that they did in 2022, because I think the reason why they had an advantage at the start of 2022 was that everyone else was overweight, and so the fact that Alfa Romeo was near the minimum weight, I think that allowed them to bank so many points at the start of the year, and that carried them through the whole year. But this year they just didn't have that, and there's nothing special about Valtteri and Joe as a driver pairing, and they weren't able to get any stonking performances in to get them points to bring them up the grid. So yep, I'm 2 spots off Alfa Romeo as well, as they finished 9th. All right though, here is where my Constructors predictions get good. Now for the midfield, and this is where things get a little bit spicy. I have Alpine in P6. I think they're going to drop back. They did. There is going to be conflict between Pierre and Esteban that is going to cost Alpine points at some point during the year. Oh yeah. I also don't see them fully fixing their reliability issues that they've had last year. And I think if they continue to have reliability issues, that will cause them severe disadvantage to the other teams in the midfield. So I do have them dropping to 6th. I was spot on with Alpine. I was a little bit worried because they had finished P4 in 2022, and I was like, is the fact that I'm dropping them down 2 places, is that a hot take? But no, I was spot on. Like, Pierre and Esteban crashed, like, I think 3 times this year and took each other out. And I mean, only one of them was really the driver's fault, but that cost them so many points. And then the fact that they had so many reliability issues, and the fact that Fernando left, like, all of what I said at the start of the year was true. And yeah, I was spot on with them. They finished P6. And then in P5, I have Aston Martin. I just think that Fernando coming into that team will do wonders. Yup. The Aston Martin has any pace whatsoever. I think he will be able to get it out of that car and consistently finish in the points. I think what's going to hold Aston Martin back is Lance Stroll. Yep. And I think this might finally be the year where people really start to question, is Stroll good enough to be an F1? They definitely did. And I think the questions will start to come to Lawrence Stroll. I was also very worried about Aston Martin because they had finished P7 the year before, and I was like, I'm feeling good about them. I think they're going to make a jump. But then the start of this year happened, and it looked like Aston Martin might have been the second fastest team, and I was like, did I undershoot how good Aston Martin was going to be? Like, I was really, really worried about that. But then the drop-off happened, and they ended up finishing exactly where I had them. So they finished P5, and so I was spot on with them too. My mind, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I have a crystal ball. I don't know, but I was spot on with them as well. So in 4th, I therefore have McLaren. I do think that Lando Norris once again is going to be best of the rest, and I think he will be probably significantly higher than anyone else, but only by 6 points. I think Oscar will be closer to him than Daniel was, and so with the combination of them both performing well, I think they will be able to outscore. And that's exactly what happened in the midfield. Stroll cost Aston Martin that spot. So yeah, I was also extremely worried about McLaren at the start of this year because it looked like they were going to be the 10th fastest team. And I was like, oh my god, did I overshoot McLaren? But no, they made a huge comeback this year, and I think halfway through this year, people were asking for hot takes about what they thought the rest of the season would be like, and people were like, oh, my hot take is McLaren's going to finish ahead of Aston Martin, and that's what ended up happening. It was insane how quickly they were able to turn things around, and I think the fact that McLaren had 2 strong drivers was exactly the reason why they finished ahead of Aston Martin. I think if they had a stronger driver than Stroll at the start of the year, they would have gotten a lot more points and would have finished ahead. So, yep, I was spot on there as well. Wow, look at me. In 3rd, I have Ferrari. Maybe I jinxed Ferrari in the last race. Oh. It's very much like a troubleshooting year, I think, for Ferrari. I don't see any way that they could make more mistakes than they did last. Yeah, that was true. They did not make as many mistakes this year. I will say they improved drastically. They had a few stinker races, but they did way better. Yeah, I might have jinxed Ferrari in Abu Dhabi because I predicted them 3rd, and that's exactly where they ended up finishing again. They improved a lot operationally from where they were in 2022, but the car was way worse this year. Pros and cons. I think they're able to put everything together. I have faith that they'll be able to do a bit better into 2024, but I think Fred is settled into that team now. I think he was able to fire a ton of people at the start of the year and clear out some of the toxic guard that was in the team, and hopefully things are on the up and up for Ferrari. So in P2, I do have Mercedes, but I think in the constructors, it's going to be extremely close.
Oh, I wish it was. I really wish it was.
The results of this, I think, are going to come down to Sergio Perez. I think that Lewis and George are going to be very close to each other, but I do think that they are going to take points off of each other, which I think will give Max the advantage in the drivers. It's just going to depend on if Sergio is able to get closer to Max's level than he did last year. I got places 1 to 6 perfectly spot on. I can't believe that I managed to do that. I don't know if I will ever be able to top that in my predictions, but places 7 through 10 were a bit of a show. But I'm pretty happy with 1 through 6. I was definitely wrong there though, in that Red Bull were so much better than Mercedes, and Perez almost costed them the second place in the drivers, but who really cares about that? And they just completely obliterated the competition. Max could have won the constructors on his own. So insane. What a year from him. So similar to the drivers, I tallied up my score for how many positions off I was. In 2022, I had a score of 12, and this year I have a score of 8. And honestly, I was positive that 12 was a score that I wouldn't be beaten, but 8 is even better. And honestly, I don't think I could do much better than that unless I predicted the entire grid correctly. Like, I think it'll be pretty tough to beat that. I just had the bottom 4 teams out of order. All around, I think I'm pretty happy with my constructors predictions, but my drivers leave something to be desired. Although I was screwed over a little bit by the fact that AlphaTauri had 3 drivers. So that is not something that could have been predicted. Okay, let's get to my hot take predictions. So my first hot take is that I think the midfield will be closer to the top teams, and I think that 10 drivers overall will be getting podiums. Max had a podium, Sergio had a podium, Lewis had a podium, Fernando had a podium, Carlos had a podium, Lando had a podium, Charles had a podium, George had a podium, Oscar had a podium, Pierre had a podium, Esteban had a podium. So 11 drivers were on the podium. So I was spot on with this one, or not spot on. I was actually a little conservative on this one, but yeah, I was expecting it for different reasons than it ended up happening, because I thought that everyone was going to be closer together. But what actually ended up happening was that Max was so dominant and all the other cars were so close together that the P2 and P3 on the podium were able to be exchanged between a ton of different drivers throughout the year. It was that P1 that not many people were able to get. My second hot take for 2023 is that I think at least one driver will be dropped because of poor behavior with their teammate. This was wrong because it's looking like not a single driver will be dropped for 2024. I mean, Nick De Vries was dropped halfway through, but I think that was more a performance issue than related to conflict with a driver. So this was wrong. And then my third hot take, which I am praying comes true, is that I think there will be less than 50 points separating first from third in the Drivers' Championship. So I think that Max, Lewis, and George will all finish within 50 points.
I was so hopeful at the start of this year.
Between P3 and P7, there was only a 50-point difference. There was a 34-point difference between those 5 positions. That Red Bull was just so dominant, and I am very sad about it. I'm hoping things will be closer next year, and hopefully other teams will get some wins. But I think as someone who's only been a fan since halfway through 2021, I think in my head 2021 would happen more frequently. But it's much more common to have a season kind of like 2023 where one team dominates for most of it. However, I don't think anyone saw one driver dominating the way that Max has this year. We all want a season like 2012. I think that would be the ideal. And I just think it's not something that can really happen in a series that isn't a spec series. That's my review of my predictions from the start of 2023. Here's to hoping that the 2024 predictions go even better.